Never before have we had a clearer vision of our world. We can observe its very details. We can study every process. Yes, mankind has conquered this planet. You may ask and wonder, what about us? Who are we really? Is reality just what you experience through the brain? Or does reality go beyond your experiences? Can you create a change by thoughts?
And I was trying to find clues for a broader type of thinking, because I could see we all get stuck in solutions of the kind more than the same. In technique and other things we made a lot of progress, but in our vision on life and death nothing happened the last 100 years. You could say in this field we still drive this antique T-Ford.
We're all thrown down here into this weird world with these highly advanced, extremely sophisticated computer devices called brains, and we're not given any instruction on what to do. We don't know why we're here. We don't know who we are. We don't know where we come from. We've gone through this thing called school. We've gone through this thing called university. And where does that leave us? Still wondering what to do next. And we still don't know anything about consciousness.
You want to have continual, people killing each other? Or do you want to go out into space? I mean, that's the choice. That's the choice. Do you want to live or do you want to die? Do you want to live as gods or do you want to die in this hell that we're creating for ourselves right here?
Years before making this film, Ronald Jan Hein was gradually reaching towards a certain point of understanding when he met his now close friend, Harry Beckers. His voyage is an amazing one, packed with insights into life. And then, they reached another sort of turning point. They met a man who challenged the world for decades to awaken to a wider reality.
Somehow he's connected with some mysterious source of knowledge out there. I guess a person would just say it's God, but that's too simplistic. It doesn't really describe the intimate detail. So I feel that he was prepared all his life to go out into the world and do what appears to be a comic act, to stand up in front of people and repair their watches without tools, or make them bend metal.
Uri Geller was born in Israel on December the 20th, 1946. His parents were Hungarian and Austrian. On his mother's side, he is related to Sigmund Freud. At the age of 4, Uri had a mysterious encounter with a sphere of light. Since that moment, it appears he has special powers. In 1969, he began to demonstrate his powers of telepathy and psychokinesis, called PK, to small audiences. Uri became famous because of his many public stage performances. In 1972, Uri left Israel for Europe, where he immediately attracted widespread attention. In Germany, witnessed by many reporters and photographers, he stopped a cable car in mid-air using his mind power. He did the same to an escalator in a major department store. And in London, he stopped Big Ben just by mind power. His real fame came through British television shows, in which he bent spoons and fixed watches. In England, thousands of people called the BBC to testify that their spoons spontaneously bent and their broken watches started to tick again. Uri's powers became world famous through magazines, newspapers, and countless TV shows. Finally, he became a kind of mythological figure with the status of a pop star. But where did these extraordinary powers come from? It all started with that strange incident.
In the middle of the garden, I saw a sphere of light. The next thing I can remember is a laser beam-like shot, or a beam shot out of this sphere and hit me on my forehead. Now, I ran home and obviously told my mother, but she didn't believe me. She thought I was making it up or I dreamt it.
Later that week, during a meal, a spoon curled up in his hand and broke.
Uri Geller.
There is actually no name generally for all what I do, but telepathy and psychokinesis.
Is there any religion involved in this? Religious?
No, I don't think so. I don't want to put it the way many people put it, that maybe it's from God or Jesus number 2 and all. That's not that.
I began to notice that the theaters were emptying upon me simply because I didn't change my act. I was not a magician. All I did was spoon bending, ring bending, mind reading, fixing broken watches and broken house appliances, and that was it. And then I found myself performing in dingy nightclubs in Jaffa, in tiny underground fringe type of discotheques and nightclubs. I was really finished and depressed and out.
Help came from an unexpected direction when he met Dr. Andrija Puharic, a prominent U.S. parapsychological researcher with ties to the CIA.
I'll never forget the day we met. I finished my show in a nightclub called Zorba in Jaffa. And I saw this figure sitting at the last table in this room, and he looked like curly hair and mustache. And he says to me, "Come over." So I came over to his table and he said to me, "Uri Geller, my name is Andrija Puharic and I'm a medical doctor, and I was sent by certain people in the United States to check your powers."
Andrija Puharic is a very interesting character. He's a pivotal figure in the post-World War II involvement of the American military into paranormal research. And they were researching consciousness and the use of the occult for military operations.
And he said, "If what I saw you do on the stage is real, then do you realize how important your powers are?"
And 2 days later, I saw Uri do his first experiment under controlled conditions, in which he took the watch of one of the people present and, without touching the watch, advanced the hands 25 minutes. And that was the beginning of a long, long adventure with Uri Geller.
Dr. Puharic convinced Uri to undergo scientific testing at Stanford Research Institute in California, partly funded by the U.S. Defense Department.
After probably 6 months or so, and I was convinced that Uri Geller was genuine, I realized that he was so genuine that nobody would believe me or anybody else that these powers were real. So I got hold of a friend of mine by the name of Edgar Mitchell, who was an astronaut.
I was called by Dr. Andrija Puharic, who had been with Uri in Israel for some period of time, and he said he had an amazing range of capabilities and that I want to investigate them. And I said, by all means. So we got together at Dr. Puharic's home in New York, and over a period of several days we did tests. I'll use the old style words: telepathy, clairvoyance, general ESP, psychokinesis, which spoon bending, and other forms that, under conditions that I had under my control, so that I knew they were quite valid. They weren't smoke and mirrors.
With hindsight, it seemed that this event was not only a turning point for Uri, but also for a number of leading progressive scientists. He also became a guinea pig for skeptical scientists who wanted to disprove his unique abilities in many prestigious laboratories. As a result, Uri Geller is by far the most tested paranormalist in the world.
Our whole concept philosophically of metal was that it was rigid, that you couldn't really bend it. That's why you used it in steel skyscrapers and in cannon barrels and so on. It was the essence or quintessence of the whole idea of materialism. Iron, unyielding, strong, resistant to any force. So the idea that somebody could just look at a piece of metal and it would curl up, it was preposterous. It went against a whole grain of 20th century and including 19th century materialistic scientific philosophy.
This was the early 70s, when science had barely begun to develop a language for discussing and analyzing causal phenomena, weird effects with causes that seem to lie outside conventional physics. Some open-minded scientists were enormously intrigued by the phenomena and realized that the future of their field would lie in this direction. They were at the beginning of a breakthrough.
You'll instantly recognize him. Astronaut Captain Ed Mitchell. You're a scientist. You're one of the most famous Americans. I won't say we're taught. Explain all this to me.
I wish I could, Jack.
Oh.
All we can say at this point is that Uri does some things that we can't explain.
This is true. And this is true of the Stanford Institute?
Yes.
A portion of it. I mean, nothing's unanimous in this field.
What we're finding is that under extremely well-controlled conditions, and I don't consider this extremely well-controlled, but well-controlled.
I understand.
He's able to do things that we cannot explain. We can't put it in the context of modern scientific theory.
The prestigious scientific magazine, Nature, published an extensive paper about the SRI results.
Uri Geller, the late Pat Price, Ingo Swann, those individuals are the true heroes in the phenomena of remote viewing. They're the people that brought it out of the darkness and brought it into our community for us to use.
He became the first man and the leader in a psychic warfare unit for the Mossad, which is the equivalent of the US CIA or the British MI5 and so on.
They were very worried about Russians and the Russian government that were testing people who were called psychics. And the Defense Department said, hey, we better catch up with the Russians in this department. Find someone who could do things for us under laboratory control conditions.
They couldn't understand how he could do the things that he was doing. The other people would have a marginal result, yet a measurable result. He would have a result that took it off the scale. So that would obviously cause them to turn around and go, gosh, you know, everybody else is back here, you're out here, what's the explanation? How do we figure out what the difference is? And that explanation was an explanation that carried over for the years. Mr. Geller was in this program years before I ever became a part of this program and was light years above and beyond anything that I was ever capable of doing.
That entire operation, that is the parapsychology research program that we initiated with Ed Mitchell and Uri Geller at Stanford Research International, quickly became classified and taken over by the CIA. I don't have to explain what the word CIA means. And ever since then, to this date, that laboratory has been pursuing the pioneering work done by Uri Geller, and yet at the same time, a different arm of the government went on defaming him, to put it very mildly.
Dr. Puharich and Uri himself could hardly believe what they were experiencing. It was beyond anything they could have imagined. Uri admits he was unable to trust his own senses, even suspecting that Dr. Puharich had hypnotized him. Anything seemed more credible than the reality of what was going on.
During these tests, which were minor telepathy and moving a compass and bending a ring, very, very odd things happened. On a few occasions, we actually witnessed the tape recorder pressing itself down on its own accord. We saw the buttons push down. And when we ran back the tape, there was a kind of hollow metallic voice telling us bizarre and strange things. Now you can imagine that I thought it was a trick tape, and at once I tore it up and I took the batteries out to look for something hidden. But it wasn't. It was really absolutely real.
If you read Jim Schnabel's book, Remote Viewers, The Secret History of America's Psychic Spies, in chapter 11 of that book, there's also a scene in which, a chapter in which those nuclear scientists from the weapons laboratory at Livermore who were researching Uri Geller, who I think I met some of them in London, but I'm not entirely sure, that they were getting spooked by weird phenomena like metallic voices, holograms of flying saucers flying in the room, talking about that they shouldn't be investigating Uri Geller.
Again and again they heard the metallic voice issuing instructions, which it claimed would be their preparation for the next 50 years.
The one thing that I can truly, I can hear it in my mind, is when the voice said that there will be a book of knowledge that I will find, or I'll find it with Andrei Puharich. And many, many times throughout my life, I was wondering, when is that going to happen?
Because of the incredible events described in his book, Dr. Puharich was placed under tremendous pressures and scientific scrutiny. Unwilling to soften his story for the sake of the skeptics, he sacrificed much of his scientific credibility.
He'd been accepted in many ways before that, and even accepted as a paranormal researcher. He'd done some extremely interesting work on telepathy and that kind of thing. And immediately after writing this book about Uri, of course, people said, my God, he must be nuts. The book is so full of incredible wonders that, you know, they go on for page after page after page, things appearing and disappearing, UFOs seen as they're driving along and all kinds of things. But the reader's sense of the incredible is finally stunned into a kind of anesthesia. So I could understand what happened. And also, when I talked to Andrea about this, Andrea said, I deliberately didn't put half of it in. He said, you know, I knew that people wouldn't believe it if I put too much of it in.
Andrea Puharich died in 1995. He understood very well that what had happened in 1973 was meaningful and important. To the last days of his life, he was convinced that Uri was an integral part of some wider scheme, a man with a mission which no one fully understood.
Uri is a formative person, he's a growing person, he's a maturing person, he is growing into spiritual awareness slowly. His background did not support that sort of thing. So I think we'll have to wait quite a while before we really understand what Uri is all about.
Uri and Andrea had to find the Book of Knowledge, and later the voice made a promise. We will send you the cosmic brain.
In our meeting with Ronald and Harry, while we were talking about their film that they produced, I brought up the Book of Knowledge because there was some type of a link between me and Harry, and I knew that he was also somewhere floating in the realms of some kind of a higher entity, body, intelligence that was connecting to him, or he was channeling from. And then I said, the Book of Knowledge, maybe the time came.
Now let us meet Harry Beckers. The year 1973, somewhere in the south of the Netherlands, a young teenage boy withdraws from learning. Born in 1960, there's no way of getting Harry to school. He finds it suffocating, His interests lie in the universe. Life, death, and the human mind fascinate him. Nature also attracts him, and on his way to school, he often stays in the woods for the rest of the day to make new discoveries. Finally, he is expelled. An adventurous life with high peaks and deep valleys starts to unfold. He marries, acquires great wealth, then loses everything. It seems as if nothing is meant to be a success. Harry withdraws more often into nature. In the autumn of 1995, he is somewhere in the wild when he suddenly observes a huge, radiant light. He begins to see such phenomena regularly and goes searching for an explanation. Could this be the same source of light that Uri saw 40 years earlier? He frequently has out-of-body experiences and is able to see energies. One night Harry awakens and notices the entire room is lit by something that seemingly shines from behind him. From then on, this light is never to be extinguished. Sometime later, also at night, Harry finds himself in the middle of a universe. Different electrical phenomena start to manifest themselves in this world that is ever present to him. In 1996, a man who suffers from hearing voices in his head crosses his path. Harry decides to help this man. What followed, he could not fully explain. One night, a bright sphere appears at the foot of his bed. The sphere starts to radiate energy, and vast quantities of information come into his mind. He finds it overwhelming and does not know how to handle it. Over the following days, however, it gradually falls into place and he gains insights into how the man's mental disorder was relieved. A period starts in which, by means of the light sphere, Harry gains deep insights into the human psyche, which he is able to test out in practice on people with symptoms of serious psychiatric problems. In the following 8 years, Harry guides more than 200 people in this way. Frequently, he brings people who have been caught in severe psychosis for long periods back to reality within a few hours. Harry tries to build a bridge between regular and alternative forms of assistance to these people. He can also gather insights into other so-called mysteries as he starts to concentrate on these. It is through his ever-present light sphere that he has access to all this information. It has nothing to do with mediumship or channeling. It's a deeper knowledge to which he has permanent access. The importance of the insights about life, death, and the solar system becomes clear, and he realizes he has to share this information. With lectures throughout Holland, he tries to part the curtains for a larger public.
Mind evolves from his own consciousness, which consists of energy. The consciousness cannot be explained in terms of place, distance, space, or time. Using earthly terms, however, one could say consciousness is allocated in a direct line with the forehead.
It was this film that brought Uri and Harry together. It was a very significant encounter between them. Both had had an experience of a sphere of light. Both had had an important message for society.
For me, it's obvious that the stories of Uri and Harry are linked one way or the other. And for me, it's obvious too that right at this time we are at the eve of a major breakthrough. And over time, it will enable us to understand more of our lives.
One of the smallest museums in the world. This construction still represents the image we make of the cosmos, really only a small part in the larger whole. A fitting starting point for a journey in space.
This is the heart of the oldest model of our solar system, a planetarium. all made of wood, built by a wool comber more than 2 centuries ago, who wanted to show the world that our solar system is constantly moving and never stops. This is amazing.
Poverty, famine, war, pollution, and disease.
That must be the Earth then.
All these problems we cause ourselves, yet we cannot get them solved. So we have to go beyond the boundaries of our thoughts. We should know more about mind and matter. When we make this step in thinking, it has enormous consequences.
We really have to take a step without consenting to lose sight of the shore for a very long time.
Full of contrasts. Contrasts which only seem to increase and bring even more problems.
President Kennedy is dead.
We can only solve these problems if we start to understand where we came from and finally realize our destination. We therefore should learn more about the deepest aspects of the process of evolution. We should gather insights into the true nature of the universe. Answers are there, waiting to be revealed. We'll soon be able to cope with the greatest challenge of mankind, to create and preserve a happier, healthier, and more understandable world. The way forward is to gather a clear vision on consciousness and how it works. Our first step to deeper insights is to recover an understanding of the existence of the soul and the continuation of life after death. In the past, concepts such as the soul and life after death were a deep-rooted conviction of every human being. These concepts were embedded in all kinds of religion. But a few centuries ago, scientists rebelled against these concepts, which did not fit their attempts to understand and master the material world. The new explanatory models brought a steam-driven industrial revolution. But meanwhile, this narrowed our view of the meaning of life. The idea arose that, if science can't explain it, it doesn't exist. Yet phenomena persisted which did not fit the new materialistic models. So, for the purpose of creating this notion picture, we asked broad-minded scientists for their views about these phenomena, which are not the subjects of mainstream scientific inquiry. As a challenging start for a remarkable journey, a kind of preface to a series of notion pictures. Ronald Yan challenged a few scientists, writers, and other experts who might confirm this much broader reality. Through their research, they too experienced that reality is much wider than we think and thought it is. In future films, we'll continue to work together with scientists who will take the insights of Harry Becker's as an alternative perspective for further investigation and writing.
There's quite a gap in science between physicists and other scientists, because the physicists with their quantum theory, they realise that things have changed and that matter isn't what we thought it was. It's rather a ghostly kind of field.
Reality goes beyond matter. When we understand this, we realize that concepts of life and death need no longer be confined to the material world. Our consciousness goes beyond that material world. But what is consciousness? Where does it come from? How can it expand itself? The origin of consciousness is as mysterious and miraculous as the creation of the universe. However, we know by now that the universe itself expands and gives birth to new stars and galactic systems. The universe expresses itself to us as matter. Consciousness, however, is a spiritual phenomenon. Physical processes in time and space that we can observe, measure, and study have their spiritual equivalent in consciousness. Every major expansion of consciousness follows the same pattern. Frequencies are tuned to each other. Energy bunches together and tries to find a way forward. An explosion follows and causes waves, creating new space, just as in the physical universe. Billions of tiny particles of expanded consciousness find a place in the newly expanded space, like seeds finding fertile soil. Every particle has the same aim, to grow and fine-tune itself with the evolving space around it. The origin of our solar system, and also of planet Earth, resembles the way consciousness creates and develops itself. There are giant magnetic storms. Gravity and the tuning process bunch energy and mass. Structures are formed. Round shapes are created. Lava forms the fertile soil for the first vegetation and other life forms. Via tuning and synchronization, evolution takes place, from minerals to organisms, from animals to human beings. The first form of life we consider to be really conscious of itself and its environment. Our solar system mirrors our consciousness. You can compare the sun to the soul, and the space within the complete solar system as the spiritual structures around the soul. Numerous processes and events at the spiritual level parallel what happens in the physical universe. Physical experiences, thought processes, and actions lead to mankind's increasing complexity and ingenuity. With information and experiences from previous lives. This information is our source code, expressed physically through DNA, and the way the brain becomes wired, causing us to react to situations in ways that are often beyond our conscious awareness. In this way, we learn and develop ourselves. In this way, we also create evolution. The purpose and meaning of life is to further refine consciousness. Every physical manifestation has a spiritual origin. For mankind, this is our consciousness. Its core, our soul, is a particle of our Creator, the larger consciousness and source from which we came into existence. Our consciousness is a spiritual image of the solar system, and our soul is like the sun to that solar system. our consciousness is immortal and infinite. Interaction between thoughts and consciousness creates structure in both our consciousness and our physical life.
What is my vision of consciousness? First of all, it can't be seen. Broader, contextually, I think that consciousness is far more expansive than what we give it credit to. I don't think that the brain and the mind are necessarily synonymous.
So the mind is not material. It's the operating system for the brain, which is material. And therefore, we have to talk about the different dimensionalities of existence.
The brain. It seems our brain doesn't decide how we act in life. That is the role of our consciousness.
If we consider the brain, then we might get somewhere in terms of understanding what consciousness is. And we can turn to neurophysiologists who study the brain, which is a hard science. They are really cutting up brains and studying them also through scanners and studying the blood flow in the different regions and all the kind of things that they do to find out what's going on here, what's going on there. Oh, there's a bit. And they study all this and piece it together, and they come up with some answers.
What you experience by your senses or by your body comes into your consciousness as well. So the brain is a receiver, receptor, and sender for your consciousness. And with this concept, all aspects of the death experience could be explained. Or when you compare it with the mobile telephone, where we are sitting here, and there will be more than 500,000 telephone calls as encoded as information in electromagnetic waves. I mean, you need an instrument to hear the voice, but the voice is not in your phone.
I think one of the most shocking things I've ever heard about the brain is that only 5% of what's in here consists of brain cells. Most people think that the whole thing is brain cells. Probably everybody thinks that. But only 5% is actual brain cells, which are known as neurons, the nerve cells, you know. And the rest of it's connections. Fantastic, rich connections. No brain cell is more than 4 brain cells away from any other brain cell because of the amazing connectivity going on.
It has an enormous range, like a piano keyboard, and the range that we human beings become accustomed to is like 2 or 3 notes right in the middle of the keyboard, whereas consciousness has these extremely high notes and these extremely low notes. Now, in certain states, we suddenly become aware of this much wider range of consciousness.
Now, the mind is not material in the sense that we are. Well, we think that we're solid. That sounds solid and it sort of feels hard, but in fact 99% of physical matter is empty space, as we've known for 100 years now.
The whole issue of can the mind or the soul survive the body? Absolutely yes. There's no question. Once we understand that what the consciousness patterns are, you can upload them into other vessels, so to speak. I mean, the brain is simply a computer. It's a material nanoscale computer. It's a post-quantum computer. And the patterns of consciousness, the direct experience, can definitely be uploaded into another form, just like putting information on a tape, just like what we're doing this videotape here. In principle, there's no reason why that can't happen.
Most of us are afraid of dying. But what do we know about it? So many stories, previously seen as spooky and mysterious, become logical and commonplace if we understand and know that our consciousness extends beyond our bodies and brains.
I believe that life after death comes before you die, I think, in your mind. And whatever your mind, the last thoughts or pictures in your mind, that's going to be your life after death, I think.
I think we just die and we die. I think we just have one chance.
I'm waiting to be together with my husband. I was married 66 years, and there has to be something that we can get back together.
I lost a sister when I was 18, I guess it was. And pretty much the only thing that got me through dealing with that was thinking that I would see her again someday.
I would think that there's, some might say like heaven or hell, there's another level there that we don't know about.
We go back into our spiritual bodies, back to God who created them. He put us in these physical bodies like as a test, you could call it. Test is over, we go back to our spiritual bodies.
I believe your spirit is continuing, but not your body.
No.
Yeah, I believe your spirit goes. So, don't believe in reincarnation.
Do you think I was a tree before, or was I a fast race car? Well, enjoy your stay.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
To consciousness, death is a happy event. It's just the end of another phase in the grand development process. To mankind, dying is a personal experience, often a lonely process, which can take place in many different ways. Each death knows its own story. Almost any way of dying has already happened within the consciousness at an earlier stage. Our thoughts create our own reality. On Earth, but even more so after death, this becomes a clear and intense reality. Due to this process, mankind is responsible for everything that takes place. According to how we see and interpret our life on Earth, our dying process and the aftermath of death, that becomes our reality. Within a natural course, humanity experiences a passage from life to death in an almost similar way. Depending on the circumstances, this is a slow or abrupt disengaging process of the energy body. As the energy separates itself, people experience different states of consciousness and are often able to experience two worlds. The pace at which this happens can vary. You may see the sad loved ones on Earth on one side, while a warm and joyful meeting on the other side has been prepared. Often, the deceased stays close to his family until after the funeral or cremation. The deceased often also tries to indicate that life continues after death. Finally, you go through an energy field of consciousness, which is the last connection with gravity. Most people experience this area as a tunnel, in which the complete earthly life from birth onwards is registered like a home video. Every event, every thought can be re-experienced, thereby creating insight into the life lived. At the end of the tunnel, the light of the soul shines, which reminds us for a moment of our origin and eternity. After this experience, we continue to the energetic state of consciousness in which the surroundings are once again created by our own thoughts.
Ich glaube ganz sicher, dass es danach, dass die Seele weiterlebt. Da bin ich überzeugt davon.
Es muss etwas geben, was weiterlebt, denn das Bewusstsein, ja, was die moderne Psychologie glaubt, durch die Nervenzellen erklären zu können, ist meiner Meinung nach nicht erklärt.
Also man weiß ja auch nicht so genau, was Seele ist, aber so das, was die Seele, also man hat ja so ein Gefühl zur Seele, dass das bleibt, dass man irgendwie...
Ich glaube, dass wenn ein Mensch ein Kind bekommt, dass er in dem Kind irgendwie wiedergeboren wird.
The domain we call the afterlife is an environment created by man himself. It looks the way we think. While mankind continues to develop within the earthly cycle, the afterlife is an immeasurable energy field in which the projection of our thoughts brings forth a reality. A kind of dream area, but tangibly real for the deceased person who is tuned into this field. The large diversity of human thoughts thereby creates many different realms. We create our own paradise, or hell. These realms are located within the 7 major states of human consciousness we pass through during our reincarnation cycle. Its colors also represent the 7 major states of human consciousness in that cycle. Like a rainbow, red to purple, from the outside to the inside. After gaining insight into all 7 colors, an attunement with the white light of the soul is created, illuminating our consciousness from that moment on. Most individuals are situated somewhere between these 7 states of consciousness. They create their own environment. For them, their view becomes ever larger and more beautiful as they realize a purer and broader way of thinking. About 1/7 of people who die are, caused by a strong desire, still attached to physical aspects, causing their continuing presence on Earth. They do so in places where they mean and hope to participate in earthly experiences. Around 1/10 of individuals become stuck within a self-created thought situation. Sometimes this is the moment of their own traumatic death, a psychological process, in some cases similar to a state of shock. The experience keeps repeating itself over and over again, and again, and again. Only the awareness that one should change one's thoughts can resolve the situation, after which the normal dying process can be completed. Afterwards, the person may recall this state of being stuck as no more than a passing moment or an unpleasant dream. A small number of the deceased are not aware they have died. They experience a change, but in their own imagination, they still participate in daily life.
At the moment, a dead friend of mine, who was a member of the Society for Psychical Research called Monty Keane, wants me to write a book about this. And he died 2 years ago, and he's asked me through his wife, who in turn was told by a medium, asked Colin if he'll write a book about me, and which, I should probably do. So, and this seems to me to be extremely interesting, because what Monty says, and I agree with you, this sounds so completely nutty that it's difficult to take seriously. Monty claims that there are a group of people in this sort of other world, which include Conan Doyle, who of course was a famous spiritualist, but also include people like Edison. Edison had very much wanted to create some kind of an electronic device with which one could communicate with the dead. Now, gradually, in fact, this is happening. They have begun to discover that you can pick up the dead electronically. And the result occurred sort of in Hamburg in about 1990. They had a broadcast in which they actually talked electronically to the dead in the studio. Now, according to Monty, there is going to be a tremendous breakthrough in this particular field. And, we should, in other words, be able to communicate with the dead as easily as you can pick up the telephone and ring somebody in China.
I would urge you to look at the Pam Reynolds case. There's an individual, a young woman, having brain surgery, totally instrumented. They stopped her heart, they stopped her breathing, and they stopped all cortical electrical activity in the brain. by every known standard medical definition, she had a death experience, not a near-death experience. And yet, she was able to describe what was going on in the room, seeing her body, conversations that took place, how the skull was physically opened and so they could get at the brain. Later went off and met deceased relatives. Now, you can correlate the information that took place in the operating room at a time when we know that she was clinically dead. Certainly is indicative of a consciousness that's much broader than the way we think of it.
The question is, what kind of explanation could we find to understand why an NDE happens and about the content, so the cause and content of an NDE? The medical, physiological, psychological, pharmacological explanation was not true. So the only explanation which is left is the theory of continuity, or some people also call it the theory of transcendence. That means that the essence of oneself, your consciousness, is not in your body, but it is outside your body.
I think the meaning of life is learning. Like when you're here, you learn by your mistakes and you try to make things better. But I think when you've been and you die, I think when you come back better. I do. But I try my best and show him the right way of life.
When you die, it's like you turn over a new leaf and start again. So I suppose then, yeah, there would be life after that.
I don't think that the human mind can die wholly because it's something so separate from the physical world. It seems to survive so many things, and yet, we find so many things beautiful and so many things that people have left behind that they've created as a beauty. It seems to transcend things that are physical.
Once you die, I think there is something after. I don't think death is the end. I do believe that there's something after that.
And what is happening then, when you die, for instance?
You stay dead.
Yeah? And what do you do then?
Lay on the floor.
Being born, living, dying, and being reborn again operates like some kind of missionary or messenger of consciousness, a cycle which keeps repeating until one has created sufficient balance within oneself.
Now, I believe in reincarnation, and in fact, I can remember being dead last time. And in fact, when you're dead, you feel a lot better than when you're what we call alive, because you're freed from all your physical infirmities for a start. That is, if you've been blind, you've got your sight back. If you've been deaf, you've got your hearing back, and whatever. You're not impeded by all these physical infirmities that make life so difficult in the physical world.
Physical experiences, thoughts, are converted into energetic vibrations and colors, whose structure and frequency become attuned to the soul. Each new life on earth is a continuation of the previous life. The many lives we have already lived contribute to the person we are today. Our consciousness continually emits signals to the mind, so that our thoughts attune themselves to previous experiences, enabling us to react to situations we have to learn and deal with. Often, we experience this as a duality within ourselves, with different impulses coming from the different directions. The more we go in a particular direction, the more our knowledge and command over that aspect of existence grows. Geniuses like Mozart and Einstein already went deep into their passion many lives before reaching their masterly expression. During the long cycle of reincarnation, we all landed everywhere on Earth. And we have been all kinds of religion.
Everything is connected, directly, instantaneously. That means that we are all connected, we are one. And this is non-local, independent of where you are, and it is an interconnectedness. Everything is connected to each other. So when you do or think something, everything else changes, the whole universe changes as well. So we are entangled as human species, also with animals, with plant, with nature.
So there is intelligence behind this entire world. There is a kind of design behind the whole thing. But we're a part of that. We're like units of this grand design.
Life does appear to have a purpose. That, you know, there is what scientists call teleology, and they dismiss it completely.
Reincarnation, absolutely, sure. Sure, because, I mean, we have experiences coded in the DNA code itself, perhaps, and yes, you can relive those experiences through the DNA, the transfer of information in DNA. I think that's definitely a possibility. I mean, there's nobody in the field of molecular genetics who understands enough about consciousness and the physics of it more than I do who can possibly debunk that. So I mean, I can't prove it, but the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the experiences. I mean, there's all kinds of data by really good scientists who have with these children in India, and they remember these things. I mean, there's no question that there's reincarnation. I mean, it's a fact that's there.
I could give you a scripted answer, a philosophical answer, but if I was being honest, I see life and death spiritually. I have to. I had cancer once before, so I have to be real about life and death, and I have to know it's God who controls all of this. And it's heaven and hell, where you go when you're done.
Okay. I lost a daughter, and I believe that she's still here. But when, how do I explain this? When she passed, it was hard because I had to get mad. Okay, I had to release it, and I literally went up here in the mountains and got mad and just, how dare you? This is not right. You should be here. And until I released that anger, she was not at peace. Once I released it, she's with me all the time.
A new birth always takes place at about the date the previous life ended, enabling us to resume the thread astronomically. The place and with whom someone is born is determined by a magnetic process which is attuned to the parent's consciousness. Each new birth on Earth is shaped from within consciousness and is experienced as a unique personality with an independent intellect. It's not the personality of the previous life. This personality continues to exist in the afterlife and can be experienced as an elder brother, sister, or guide stemming from the same consciousness. About 4 weeks after conception, a first connection is created between the fetus inside the mother and the consciousness willing to live a new life on Earth. After approximately 4 months, a new life is created. The fetus by then is inhabited by the soul. Throughout our entire life, consciousness emits impulses. It inspires our thoughts. These can react to that, always of one's own free will. Ultimately, our thoughts determine whether we react, and if so, how. These impulses can take place through a kind of magnetic connection between consciousness and the forehead. The signals from consciousness are transmitted in our body through the brain and the nervous system. From the soul, a second connection exists. This is connected to our heart and gives us life energy transmitted in our body via the heart and bloodstream. If necessary, consciousness programs unfinished events from a previous life into the cells of the new body by the chromosome system and DNA. And if consciousness determines that physical or mental defects have to be experienced, these will be programmed into the new body too. In the material world, we call this heredity. Both the physical and spiritual universes are electromagnetic, and therefore everything is attuned. Action and reaction, cause and effect are ingenious processes originating from thought. Our actions are driven by thoughts, and every thought is energy of a certain frequency, color, and sound. Every thought is a manifestation within our consciousness. Because of the magnetic principle, a continuous attuning takes place to equalize energy. This constant attuning also determines how and with whom you come into contact, to whom you feel attracted.
Mind is the fundamental nature of this world. Mind is primary and the material world is secondary. Mind is actually shaping matter at every moment. This terrifically different way of looking at the world, in my view, a very important shift that science is capable of making, I think. It's being nudged to do that by these pioneers. And when all of us understand this better, that mind is primary and matter is secondary, I think it'll be really valuable for all of us, because looking back on my own life, I feel I've seen so much more happiness, and life makes so much more sense when I've made that shift to understanding that my mind and my consciousness, my thoughts, are the primary factor in my own life. And if I attend to them and take care to think good thoughts, elevated thoughts about myself, about others, that changes the way I see the world. And that change in the way I see the world changes the world. It's amazing.
Many times I wonder, can fresh insights about consciousness help us to create a better life and a better world? Can they contribute to solving the problems we are confronted with in so many fields? Can they change our views about mind and matter? I was searching for scientists, authors and others who are working in these fields to discuss their views on consciousness. I believe human consciousness should be seen not just as a concept, but as a tool to act, something we can use in an active way. A broader view of consciousness can radically shift the way we all see, think and act.
Paradigms are not true or false. They are just ways of organizing knowledge. They're, if you will, kind of basic models of thought. In that way, the paradigm has its own dynamic and its own life. And part of this life is to realize itself and kind of make itself exclusive. And so any other kind of paradigm that comes in is kind of like an immune system. It's rejected and in many different ways. It can be wiped under the rug. It can be, people can be burned at the stake for say. I mean, there's many different ways of that it defends itself in. But in science, it usually goes nowadays by just ignoring, ridiculing, or something like that, or not providing money for research. I mean, there's many ways.
As we understand, quantum physics more, some of these things are real. It changes certainly our paradigm about how we view ourselves, our position in the universe, and our understanding of what are called the laws of physics.
The quantum physics pioneers found that there was an inextricable link between the observer and what was observed. And that territory, which was explored back in the 1930s, some of those pioneers were saying the world is not as we've been understanding it. The consciousness of the observer is so important in what happens down at this subatomic level that we've been clearly missing out a hugely important factor in our descriptions of reality.
In Einstein's general theory of relativity, which includes the gravitational field, compared to the special theory of relativity that does not have gravity in it, there are things you can do in the general theory which are not possible to do in the special theory. So this is the way, the nature of science, as a larger theory enables you to do more things. Things that are forbidden in the smaller theory are possible in the larger theory.
Thomas Kuhn stressed that science does not progress via a linear accumulation of new knowledge, but instead undergoes periodic revolutions, the so-called paradigm shifts. Like a sudden explosion of knowledge, these can abruptly transform our world.
When that happens, at some point somebody will come up, some new paradigm will just come out of nothing. I mean, it'll just come out as an act of creation in somebody's mind. And many paradigms come up that way and they're tested, but you know, something new will come out that's finally really turns out to be very powerful, and more people group around that, and that becomes like the core of a new wave. That's the scientific revolution.
Well, I think modern science, as we know it in the Western world, is materialistic and reductionistic based science. That means we try to go into more and more details, but we don't see the whole anymore.
By and large, science does not reward big questions. They will say they do, but the reality is that we reward people who make small advances in existing field. People who make big advances are, of course, ridiculed initially until the evidence becomes absolutely overwhelming that, oh, they were right in the first place. And then we say, well, of course we knew that.
It seems disbelief itself can spread and become irrational. I guess emotions get attached to things. And you could see that the journals are one centre of power, at least the editors of journals, because they ultimately they decide, usually consulting referees, if a work is acceptable or not. But if a referee is sufficiently strongly prejudiced, he can simply block a paper without even considering it just a subject. This is very bad for science, because it may be that science made a mistake, and that has happened in the past. The famous proposal of continental drift, and this was proposed getting on for a century ago, and people said this is nonsense, and despite the very strong evidence that continents were joined together, people said this is a stupid idea, and they ignored the evidence. So this is what can happen.
Because the matter-oriented paradigm had become so dominant, it was as if most of their colleagues in science couldn't really hear that. And we've had to wait 70 or 80 years before the real implications of quantum theory are starting to be faced up to.
When we think about any situation, issue, most people think of what are the boundaries, what's the absolute most that can be done that they know of from their own experience. If you remember, a few hundred years ago, the world was flat, and that was our experience of the world, and it took quite a while before people said, no, you know, Christopher Columbus came along and said the world is round.
And whole bodies of evidence, for example, going back to the debate over the role of complementary medicine. Some scientists, some doctors still today rejecting the whole thing as nonsense. Luckily a small band of them now, a small band of, and diminishing band of diehards, we would say. But that inability to see things that are staring you in the face is part of the human condition today, and it's one of the reasons that I think that we need this shift away from thinking of ourselves just as lumps of matter who happen to have become quite clever.
The new consciousness-based paradigm, when more widely understood and accepted, would help resolve many medical and scientific.
Overall, the medical community still has a mechanistic model of the body. And, it's a big machine and we tinker with it, we can fix it or not fix it. Death is the absolute enemy, as opposed to looking at a much broader context that say, it's a piece of continuation of consciousness.
If we understand that death is a transformation and that life is eternal by its very nature, because it takes place in a context of eternity, that all we experience are transformations, and that there is a kind of evolutionary direction to this, of growth towards the light, some traditions say. If we understand that, then the fear which kind of paralyzes and which limits us to such a great degree kind of lifts.
I wrote a series of articles about organ donation for the Sunday Times. At the time, it was understood people were being encouraged to donate their organs. They were told that they would be dead when those organs were taken from them. But some doctors drew our attention to the fact that these donors were not dead. The concept of brain death was brought in, and then the equating of brain death with being dead, so that then allowed the surgeons to start operating on you while you were actually still alive. They did some stress tests, physiological measures, as the scalpel went in to start the dissection process. And lo and behold, they found that in many of these patients, the signals were of huge alarm. Blood pressure would shoot up, heart rate would speed up, all the signs of deep distress.
Neville Hodgkinson adds that in the wake of these reports, doctors decided to anesthetize donors to prevent the possibility of distress. To avoid unnecessary complications, we should prepare both donor and receiver based on a broader insight into consciousness and the way it is attached to our material life. The personal level of consciousness of both donor and receiver can influence whether an organ transplant is successful. If a donor is very attached to physical aspects, he might have trouble releasing these after the donation. Such a situation can pose a serious impediment for the donor in the usual process of dying and their journey to the afterlife. But it will also affect the receiver of the organ.
Some donor recipients, some organ recipients, have experienced a change of character after receiving their donor heart or lung or liver. And yes, it makes some sense that could be the case, that an organ would not only be a physical pump or whatever, chemical processor, but that something of the consciousness of the previous owner might carry over with it.
And I personally believe that each cell, each living cell in your body has a connection with consciousness. It's not only your brain, it's also your heart, but each cell has a connection. So when 96% of your body is still functioning, is still living, there's still a connection between all those cells and consciousness.
Colonel John Alexander had a remarkable experience showing that our body cells remain connected to our personal consciousness even when located some distance from ourselves. Saliva from his mouth was examined under a microscope 100 meters away from him when he had to address an important meeting.
And I stood up and I started describing the experiment, and the lab assistant comes running in and says, "What happened about a minute and a half ago?" He says, "Why?" He says, "Well, the needle just went crazy over there." And so what you saw was for hours, this little needle was just going blah, 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 blah. And then it got to this point, and it is hitting the stopper. It's just a huge electrical signal. Now, telling the National Research Council that the universe is not built the way they think it is an emotionally stimulating situation for me. And so it was my cells that it was monitoring. They saw this. Interestingly, when you get to the report, there's not a word. It's like the incident didn't even happen. So I say the white crow flew right in front of them, and they chose to ignore it.
From early civilizations up to the present, society struggles to cope with phenomena such as schizophrenia, psychosis, and dementia. Still, we cannot understand such states of mind. A growing number of scientists feel the need for a wider perspective, and it's only a matter of time before the majority in psychiatric research realizes that every important breakthrough can only be found within the new consciousness-based paradigm.
Psychiatry of all specialities should be dealing with the psyche, but there was really a move in psychiatry in keeping with the rest of medicine just to become very physically oriented, you know, to regard every illness as caused by some deficiency and to provide a pill to try and make that good. Within the Royal College of Psychiatrists, there is a system where there are 6 or 7 special interest groups, and the fastest growing, with about 1,500 members, is spirituality and psychiatry. The Royal College, which is in charge of training and standards within psychiatry, embracing spirituality as a relevant subject for psychiatry. It's a great sign of the times.
Harry Becker's worked for 8 years with severely ill psychiatric patients, specializing in psychosis and schizophrenia. Based on his insights into the way our consciousness is formed and behaves, Beckers believes the symptoms of schizophrenia and psychoses originated extreme and uncontrolled thought processes. As in a dialogue, the deeper consciousness continually intrudes thought impulses into the conscious thoughts of the patient until they become obsessive and uncontrolled. Long-lasting, powerful thoughts can create a certain frequency, which attunes to a state of consciousness comparable to the state in which we experience our dreams. Here, our thoughts create an instant personal reality, which can best be described as a dream or nightmare that never seems to end, experienced in a waking state. This process can also be experienced in other layers or states of awareness. According to this understanding, schizophrenia is not caused by a chemical malfunction of the brain. Actually, it's the other way around. The chemical malfunction is caused by imbalances between consciousness and thoughts. Insights into the mechanism involved, and through that, learning how to control thoughts, can offer a permanent solution. The physical body has 2 separate connections with consciousness and the soul. An interruption to these connections has a direct impact on the functioning of the physical body. In the case of the heart connection, this instantly marks the death of the physical body. The second connection, between consciousness and thought, can also be severed. Beckers assumes it's when this connection loses inner dialogue that symptoms can be observed which we recognize as dementia. As a result, the frame of reference of thought limits itself more and more to signals only from the present life. At the time when there's no longer a tuning between consciousness and thoughts, thoughts are no longer registered in this energy field. The result is that every thought is forgotten at the moment of thinking. During life, every thought, every experience was imprinted in this energy field, which we also experience after death as the tunnel, the ultimate connection between the physical and spiritual realm. As long as the soul provides the physical body with life force, the mind may float timeless in this energy field. In a further state of this process of decay, experiencing just the memories stored in this field. After the physical death, the entire process of decay and the timeless experience is often perceived as a moment or a vague memory.
The argument that matter is the only reality and that mind is just some kind of cream on the cake resulting from neuronal activity, because scientists are holding on to that so tightly, it's actually stopping them from acknowledging and building into their awareness a whole realm of evidence that's accruing, that's indicating that that narrow view is limited in its usefulness.
There are interesting hints from conventional science of paranormal things. Some kind of contact at a distance is a characteristic of quantum theory, but we don't really understand how to put it all together yet, so that's a challenge for the future, I think.
A publisher approached me and said, would I write a book about the occult? Well, I didn't particularly want to write a book about the bloody occult. I thought, what a bore. Because I was a scientist. I'd been trained as a scientist, and I'd intended to become a scientist in my teens, until I suddenly decided that I'd rather be a writer. And so I thought, oh, well, no harm in writing a book full of nonsense. It'll make some money. And so I just started to write this book called The Occult. Then an odd thing happened. The more I studied the examples of the so-called occult and paranormal, the more I realized they were true.
In the early 1980s, I was fortunate enough to actually have an assignment in the intelligence community that allowed me to look at a wide range of anomalous phenomena. Remote viewing was one piece. I actually worked more with psychokinesis and some other interesting remote sensing technologies or other than remote viewing. So we were looking at the spectrum. PK was particularly interesting to us because people would say, what are you going to do, bend tank barrels? And you say, no, I'm going to move electrons. Computers are the risk, not bending huge things. That's just a demonstration of the capability.
The CIA also recognized this many years ago and defined remote viewing as follows.
What we do here is train selected individuals to transcend time and space, to view persons, places, or things remote in time and space, and to gather and report intelligence information on the same.
The insights into consciousness have a direct consequence and imply that life is not restricted to planet Earth. Of course, there are weird stories circulating about this, which is logical when you're dealing with a mystery. But surprisingly enough, just this mystery has the most evidence.
What we know is that 7% of the adult population of the world has seen UFOs. That is true in the military as it is in the civilian sector.
It's a matter of empirical fact that we're conscious. It's a matter of empirical fact now that there are UFOs and that they are able to, for example, they're able to do maneuvers that our jet aircraft cannot do.
When I say multi-sensory, they're caught on satellites, they're caught on film, they're caught on radar. Just about every sensor system we have out there has caught them many times at the same time. So there's no doubt about the physical reality of the incident.
Some of them may be carbon-based like we, some of them may be silicon-based, some of them might be based on electromagnetic vortices existing in some plasma medium. I mean, some of them could be on a completely different plane of materiality, some other kind of level. So what?
The Condon report was actually right, because the question to Condon was not, do UFOs exist? It was, are UFOs a threat?
First of all, I do believe we're in cosmic quarantine, and they wouldn't really want to sort of be fraternizing with us on a sort of hey there type basis. They might observe and monitor and study, but they certainly wouldn't want to get too close. We are dangerous. We are killers. We're psychopaths. We're not really good neighbors.
Their purpose is, so to speak, to drive us up the evolutionary ladder, whether we like it or not, by subjecting us to experiences that completely change our ordinary paradigm. And that, in other words, their aim is to create a paradigm shift in the human race.
Mind creates matter. This also means that matter reacts to our thoughts. The ultimate consequence could be that collective thoughts can strongly influence the Earth and even matter beyond our planet. Failure to understand this link could be a main reason for individuals ignoring major recent threats to the future of the planet, such as global warming, pollution, and exhausting natural resources.
I'm very involved in the greatest threat facing our world, global warming. This is something that is so big, and you would think to everyone so obvious, that it's the number one problem. Because if we don't do something about it pretty quick, we won't be around.
If consciousness mirrors the solar system, then it wouldn't be strange that while consciousness attunes to the soul, the solar system also attunes to the sun. This could have an immediate effect on the absorption of sunlight for the planets and increase temperatures. In such a case, we would have another dimension to think about as the cause of global warming. The universe is strewn with life. In our own solar system alone, there are several intelligent life forms developing consciousness in various ways. However, not in the physical form as we know it. But these life forms also originate from the great consciousness. They demonstrate a strong relationship with mankind, since they also evolve within the same great consciousness. So the faster we as mankind become aware of our origin and capacity and live accordingly, the sooner we'll be able to cooperate constructively and consciously within and outside the solar system. When we understand consciousness, the idea of other life forms in our solar system is simple to grasp. Many civilizations have inhabited planet Earth, from thousands to millions of years ago. The most recent had a huge impact on present mankind, Atlantis.
I think that there was a culture that covered the whole surface of the Earth at some point during the last 100,000 years. And I suspect that this culture had reached a fairly high level as long ago as 60,000 years ago.
The story goes that the further evolved beings were engaged in a fierce battle amongst themselves, a battle between positive and negative energy. The enormous friction between these powerful energies caused terrible natural disasters, which marked the end of the Atlantis civilization. One group of the further evolved beings withdrew to spiritual centers. They influenced people by means of negative energy. The other group also withdrew. They remained at several locations on Earth to guide susceptible people from there in a positive and constructive way. This dichotomy from the period of Atlantis still exists today and is the root cause of our most pressing crises. At an ever-increasing speed, we are breaking down our world.
Why was it that millions of people allowed themselves to be killed for nothing for several years in Europe early in the 20th century? What did they think they were doing? What was the First World War about? No one really knows what it was about. Everybody knew it was coming. There wasn't any informed or educated person who did not know that a world war was imminent. But what did they do to stop it? They didn't stop it. And this is what it's like now with the destruction of our planet.
We lost religion 2 or 3 centuries ago with the rise of science, and this was absolutely inevitable because it depended upon all kinds of superstitions and dogmas which were simply factually untrue. This began a long period of skepticism and gloom and misery, which reached its climax in the mid-20th century. Then I think we began to rise once again, and I think this rise will actually take the human race to a completely new level. I'm convinced that we are on the point of an evolutionary leap.
It's like a puzzle of 1,000 pieces. We had to start somewhere.
I think Max Planck probably got it right when he says science advances, funeral by funeral, meaning that the people with these preconceived notions have got to die off.
I call this the planet of the killer monkeys. We seem to only be interested in running around killing each other. That's our favorite hobby.
You want to have continual, people killing each other? Or do you want to go out into space? I mean, that's the choice. That's the choice. Do you want to live or do you want to die? Do you want to live as gods or do you want to die in this hell that we're creating for ourselves right here?
If we change our thoughts, the world around us changes with us. But if we accept and understand this broader reality, we can conquer the terrain of the unknown.
Modern physics has big enough concepts to explain all of these things as part of the natural order. It's not supernatural.
This is much more than an intellectual challenge. It is a sheer necessity. To survive, mankind has to solve the 5 greatest disasters in the world: poverty, famine, war, pollution, and disease.
Mind is the fundamental nature of this world. Mind is primary and the material world is secondary. Mind is actually shaping matter at every moment.
A debate has been raging in recent years over the rival concepts of intelligent design and evolution. But why must we think in the one or the other?
We're not just lumps of matter wildly and chaotically finding our way in a cold, hostile universe, but there's actually a beautiful plan in which we are participants.
Our world is a result of our collective thinking. Everything is entangled. We are the creators of our own cosmos, so we are responsible for everything around us. And although public awareness is rising enormously, change not only needs intention, but also action.
I feel that at this time I got together with people who are the backbone of an immense treasure of knowledge that has to be spread now.
It won't just happen. It requires a particular kind of effort to do it.
This film is an immensely important film, and I really hope that it spreads around the world like fire.